Welcome to Skill-Based Art, a learning resource for art students and artist teachers. My name is Emilio Longo, and I'm the founder and director of Skill-Based Art. This product review is on M. Graham & Co. Artists Oil Paint. M. Graham & Co. are an American artist paint manufacturer located in the Willamette Valley in Hubbard, Oregon, who serve artists by producing the finest quality artist-grade oil, acrylic, watercolor, and gouache paints. Their paints have the highest color saturation of any fine art paints on the market, which contain brilliant mass tone and high tinting strength. M. Graham & Co. have a particular focus on providing artists with safe, solvent-free paint that is made using the purest traditional ingredients, including the highest quality pigments, which are sourced from all over the world. In fact, M. Graham & Co. were one of the first artist paint manufacturers to create oil colors that are entirely solvent-free, making them a pioneer in the field of non-toxic art materials. For 33 years now, M. Graham & Co. have stood by their belief that every artist deserves the finest colors available. They have been addressing artists' concerns about the detrimental effects of art materials on their health through creating a solvent-free paint system, which has enabled many artists to return to oil painting after having had some bad experiences with using solvents in their painting process. Through their efforts, M. Graham & Co. have held a unique position in the artist paint industry through reviving the craft of handmade, small batch artist paints that are produced using natural, historic formulas which include honey for their watercolors and walnut oil for their oil paints. M. Graham & Co. paints are native to the Pacific Northwest. However, their paint is readily available in Australia, with many art stores stocking them. The company was founded on December 23, 1992 by Arthur or Art Graham and his wife Diana, both of whom have a passion for oil painting and the Renaissance masters. They set out to create a line of artist colors that represented the values which they believed in as artists themselves. High on their priority was keeping the paint solvent-free. Art graduated with a fine arts degree in the 1970s while having had a thorough formation in artist materials, specifically color making, and Diana having had more than 20 years of experience in the art industry herself through art supply distribution. Art grew up in Staten Island, New York. He received his formal training in painting and graphic design from Parsons School of Design in New York before moving on to study at Cooper Union, also in New York, where he graduated with an undergraduate degree in fine arts. He returned to Parsons School of Design to teach painting between the years of 1975 to 1981. During this time, he started exhibiting his paintings in the Soho district of New York. After graduating, he had a job working for M. Grumbacher, producing and trialing art materials between the years of 1970 to 1978, before advancing to product manager and then becoming the director of marketing. Following this period, Art and Diana started focusing their efforts on designing their own line of artist paints, eventually scaling their company into a respected and reputable brand that has become recognized and in demand by artists worldwide. In the early days, while Art made the paint, Diana worked on the marketing and business side of things. In 2016, they decided that it was time to hand the company over to new ownership so they could dedicate more of their time to their own painting and travels. M. Graham & Co. was sold to Cork and Jackie Selinsky, who would come to lead the company to where it is today. Cork was a very suitable successor to Graham, as he had spent his entire life in the art industry and had worked with Graham and Diana since the inception of the M. Graham & Co. brand. Although today the ownership has changed, Cork and Jackie have maintained the company's values by offering the same exact quality and standards in the paint manufacturing process. They still have the same color formulator and lead filler, who was trained by Art himself. Their mill hands who make the paint have also not changed. In fact, Tino has been with the company for 25 years now. Like Art and Diana, Cork and Jackie remain dedicated to protecting and preserving the beauty of the earth, from the source to the end product through their solvent-free paints. When it comes to the manufacturing of artist quality oil paint, the majority of manufacturers use linseed, safflower, or poppy seed oil as a binder. All drying oils rely on the quantity of unsaturated fatty acids in them to dry and form a film. Both linseed and walnut oil are composed of the same primary fatty acids, which are oleic, linoleic, and linolenic. However, the differences lie in how much of these fatty acids are contained in each one. When compared to the composition of linseed oil fatty acids with that of walnut, walnut is superior as it is more stable, flexible, and has a longer shelf life. Linseed oil has a higher quantity of linolenic acid, which is one of the most unstable fatty acids that is taken from vegetables. It is known to increase the yellowness and brittleness of the paint film. Walnut oil-based paint is also known to remain truer in color over time when compared to linseed oil-based brands. This is especially important in yellows, whites, and blues. Going back to the 16th and 17th century, the most commonly used drying oils were linseed and walnut. Back then, it was a standard practice for a painter to paint sections of a painting where color retention wasn't critical with linseed oil. An example would be areas where browns and blacks were used, where yellowing of the oil wasn't detrimental to the painting's outcome. Alternatively, in areas of the painting where color retention was important, such as in lighter areas where white was predominant, walnut oil would be used. M. Graham & Co. differ uniquely from other artist oil paint manufacturers as they use American cold-pressed, unbleached natural walnut oil exclusively for their oil paint, without any preservatives added. When compared to linseed oil, walnut oil is double the price. Walnut oil handles similarly to linseed oil in that it is considered to be a fat medium. However, it has a unique refractive index, and when mixed with pigment, it makes for a clear, free-flowing, non-streaking, and slow-drying paint, which has been used by painters for more than 2,000 years, especially by the masters of the Renaissance. In fact, walnut oil dries approximately 20% slower than linseed oil, depending on the climate and the thickness of the paint film. M. Graham & Co.'s walnut oil dries to a clear film that allows the true vibrancy of the jewel-like color to be seen through it. It also tends to not yellow as severely as linseed oil, especially in whites, blues, and yellows. Additionally, M. Graham & Co. prefer using walnut oil as it allows them to increase the amount of pigment loading in their colors, which enables them to have incredible color saturation, richness, and tinting strength. For the purpose of this review, M. Graham & Co. have kindly donated 12 of their 37 milliliter oil paints, which include cadmium red, Naples yellow, cadmium orange, transparent red oxide, ultramarine blue, titanium white, ivory black, Prussian blue, alizarin crimson, Van Eyck brown, cadmium yellow, and terra rosa. M. Graham & Co. oil paints allow artists to use a traditional oil paint without the harsh solvents. They achieve this by encouraging artists to use walnut oil as a painting medium and as a brush cleaner to bypass the need for using toxic solvents in the painting process. The majority of artists who use M. Graham and Co. oils find that their paints don't need to be diluted more than they already are straight out of the tube. However, for painters who require a particularly thin or more fluid and creamy mixture of paint, M. Graham and Co. recommend adding between 1 to 3 drops of walnut oil per inch of extruded paint and mixing thoroughly. More can be added to get the desired consistency of paint. However, caution should be taken when adding excessive amounts of walnut oil, as it can make the paint too thin and oily. As an alternative to walnut oil, M. Graham and Co. offer their walnut alkyd medium, which is also solvent-free, non-toxic, and doesn't contain any wetting agents or defoamers. It's composed of walnut oil with the addition of an alcohol-based resin. It's a drying agent, but the most important feature is increased adhesion between the paint film, the painting substrate, and the paint layers, which ultimately results in a more flexible and durable painting that is non-yellowing and has increased surface sheen. Walnut oil can always be used on top of the walnut alkyd in subsequent paint layers if the need arises. If desiring to achieve a creamier consistency of the walnut alkyd medium, M. Graham and Co. again recommend adding between 1 to 3 drops per inch of extruded paint and of course mixing thoroughly. The medium is fat, therefore the fat over lean rule should be followed to prevent any cracking to the subsequent paint layers. Whether purchasing M. Graham & Co.'s walnut oil or walnut alkyd medium, both come in 4 ounce, 8 ounce and 32 ounce containers. Now, when it comes to glazing or painting alla prima, M. Graham & Co.'s walnut oil or walnut alkyd medium can both be used to mix paints. Which one to choose will depend on one's painting method and what results they are trying to achieve. If using walnut alkyd, caution should be taken when adding the medium, as if too much is included into the paint mixture, the paint layers will become so glossy that additional paint layers won't stick to it. The paint mixture may also become increasingly sticky and will not dry and possibly lead to cracking. It's important to understand that the walnut alkyd medium is intended to be mixed with paint and it's not to be used as a varnish. The walnut alkyd can of course be used with other brands of artist oil colors. Alternatively, if one prefers using their paint mediums more generously, then it is advised to use the walnut oil, as it won't have this issue with drying if too much is used. It should be noted, however, that adding walnut oil to paint doesn't make it thinner. Rather, it makes it have a creamier body and thus it will come off the brush a lot smoother. Be mindful that the drying time will be extended with the more walnut oil one adds to the paint mixture and by the thickness of the paint layer. M. Graham & Co.'s walnut oil can be used to oil out a painting once it's entirely dry as well. This can be done by using a soft lint-free rag and applying a thin layer of walnut oil to the surface of the painting, then wiping off 90 to 95% of the oil from the surface. A thin and even residual layer of walnut oil should remain to coat the painting surface. M. Graham & Co.'s walnut oil can even be used to clean your paintbrushes. In fact, many pre-20th century masters used walnut oil to clean their brushes as they didn't have access to petroleum-based solvents. Using walnut oil will result in your brushes lasting longer as it's gentler on natural and synthetic hair brushes. This is due to the reason that solvents work to dissolve the paint from the bristles of the brush, whereas walnut oil causes the paint to slide off the bristles. Walnut oil is also a natural vegetable oil that doesn't evaporate or remove essential oils from paintbrushes. Just be aware that if you're going to be leaving your paintbrushes to sit for more than a day, be sure to wash the walnut oil out of the brush. Walnut oil is a drying oil, and if oil is left in the brush long term, it will dry and make the brush unusable. M. Graham & Co. oil paints are available in 75 colours, which come in two different paint tube sizes, 37 and 150 milliliter. The 37 milliliter tubes are available in 75 colours, including 4 whites, and the latter come in 20 colours and 4 whites. These oil paints can be mixed with any other brand of oil paint, including those that use linseed oil. However, M. Graham & Co.'s oil paint flow more freely from the tube than most artist oils and remain wet for longer. It's important to keep in mind that every pigment handles differently, and some require more than just oil to be suitable for painting. However, M. Graham & Co. don't use any fillers, additives, adulterants, or stabilizers in their paint. Only walnut oil is used, which doesn't negatively impact the pigment properties. Therefore, no chemical stabilizers are needed and no bulking agents are used to increase batch sizes. All of their colors are ground in walnut oil, with the exception of their titanium white sunflower, which is ground in sunflower oil to prevent excess yellowing. It is their only titanium white that contains no zinc. On the other hand, their titanium white rapid dry is their titanium white option with added dryers, which makes for a good mixing white. Additionally, M. Graham & Co. use the same pigments for each of their paint lines. Whether it's oil, acrylic, gouache, or watercolor, you can have confidence knowing that the colors will be the same. After using M. Graham & Co. oil paints for a while, one tends to find that the texture of some of their paints have more of a smoother and creamier consistency than other brands. This is due to the varying pigment sizes, which dictates how much milling and mixing is required in the paint factory to make the paint usable for oil painting. M. Graham & Co. have a specific number of times that certain pigments need to be run through the mill to get them just right for painting purposes. For instance, some colors such as this titanium white needs to be mixed for only half an hour and then run through the mill rollers twice. Other colors such as ultramarine blue may be mixed, run through the mill rollers once, mixed a second time, and then run through the rollers 2 or 3 more times. In fact, there are some colors such as red and orange transparent oxides that take a whole day to mill. This explains why some colors feel coarser than others while painting. The purity of M. Graham & Co.'s pigments gives them a staining power that makes color mixing a lot easier when compared to other paint brands. This is especially noticeable when using their transparent colors for glazing. In fact, M. Graham & Co. test and compare their colors against other paint brands on a regular basis to ensure the pigment load of their paints is the very best that it can be. One may be curious to know whether other solvent-based painting mediums that aren't of the M. Graham & Co. brand can be used with their oil paints. The answer is yes, they can. In fact, using solvent-based painting mediums may be necessary for some painters in order for them to achieve a particular technique. It's just important to know what the contents of the solvents are so you can take the appropriate steps to protect your health and the environment. We all know of painters who have unfortunately had to make the switch from oils to acrylics or watercolor and gouache as they had nasty reactions to solvents or due to the reason of not having adequate air ventilation in their studio. Some art schools and artist societies have in fact banned students from using solvent-based painting mediums because of these reasons. With M. Graham & Co. oil paints, this is no longer the case. One may ask if ventilation is still needed when using M. Graham & Co. products. The walnut oil does contain a food-grade oil smell, which most artists feel they don't need an expensive ventilation setup for. However, it's important to note that different paints are made from various pigments, which have different smells and they can have adverse effects on the body. Therefore, adequate ventilation is generally always recommended when working with oil paint. When it comes to drying time for M. Graham & Co.'s walnut oil or the walnut alkyd medium, they recommend waiting between 6 to 12 months for the paint film to completely oxidize and harden before varnishing the painting. This time frame, of course, depends on environmental factors such as temperature and humidity. Failing to allow the paint film to fully cure before varnishing can result in the paint layers cracking. As M. Graham & Co.'s walnut oil and walnut alkyd medium are made from natural products, they do have a shelf life. How long the mediums last are dependent on how and where they are stored, as well as the environment they are stored in. M. Graham & Co. recommend that their mediums are stored in a cool, dry place that is away from direct sunlight in order to extend their expiry date. Although M. Graham & Co.'s walnut oil is food grade, they do not recommend that walnut oil purchased from a grocery store be used with their paints. Oil purchased from a grocery store often includes preservatives, which will affect how the paint dries and may in fact prevent the paint from drying entirely. M. Graham & Co.'s commitment to environmental friendliness and solvent-free processes doesn't stop with their paints. It also extends to their painting and cleaning procedures. Walnut oil and non-toxic soaps are used to clean their rollers and related paint-making equipment. Reducing their carbon footprint is important to M. Graham & Co. To this end, they reuse the backing from all of their labels as packing material instead of buying new ones. They recycle and reuse the water waste, which they use to clean their equipment. They also have a dedicated service which they work with who collect the water waste from their factory and treat it before it's released into the waste stream. Further to this, they purchase 100% renewable energy, use high efficiency lighting, and balance their energy usage with carbon offsets, which reflects on their dedication to protecting and preserving the environment. As for cost, M. Graham & Co. oil paints are priced very reasonably considering that they are American made. In fact, they tend to be cheaper than some of their American competitors who are charging more for a similar artist quality oil paint. However, some of these companies aren't taking the measures that M. Graham & Co. take to ensure their products are solvent-free and not harming the environment. For artists seeking eco-conscious materials without sacrificing on performance, M. Graham & Co. are a trusted choice. As mentioned at the start of this review, M. Graham & Co. paints are native to the Pacific Northwest. Their website doesn't allow for orders to be placed. However, they do have a convenient store locator function on their website, which one can state their location and a list of suppliers that are close by will be provided. To learn more about M. Graham & Co.'s paint range, please visit their website, which is www.mgraham.com. My name is Emilio Longo, founder and director of Skill-Based Art, and this has been another product review. My best to you with your training.